Hey y'all, thanks for coming. Nice to see once again that it's standing room only. I have the very unfortunate responsibility to let you know that you are drinking other people's abortions. You may not think that that's what's happening, but I'm telling you that's 100% what is happening. More than 6 in 10 abortions today are chemical abortions. That's actually a lie. There's no national abortion reporting law. I'm going to speed through some facts, but here's the thing to understand. Right now, the majority of abortions are going into the toilet, chemically tainted blood, placenta tissue, and fetal remains. Stuff that if it was at a hospital or a brick and mortar facility would be handled differently. But because of what Biden-Harris did during the COVID response, and this wasn't really a COVID response, it was a long-term plan by the abortion industry. In fact, because of that now, we have outsourced the Holocaust of abortion to cemeteries in our sewers. I got to go through some slides because really this is about the big picture of chemical abortion today. We're lucky to have 2 brilliant legal minds here. I'm not a lawyer, I just play one on TV. I did give birth to one. But I've been covering the law and covering the courts as a reporter and then on the other side of it. So I guess you might say I'm a bit of a nerd. I'm a legal nerd. I like to read legal things for fun. We'll speed through some of these things. Chemical abortion. Okay, what is... Yeah, you guys are welcome to come on in or come sit down in the front. Don't yell fire in a crowded theater, and I don't care if you come in. There's some places over there. Chemical abortion, what it is and what it isn't. It's not birth control. It's a 2-pill regime approved by the FDA, the first drug of which starves the baby. It blocks progesterone, the pregnancy hormone, and disrupts the pregnancy. The baby may or may not die because of this. In fact, often the baby can be born alive. The second pill starts contractions. And when you hear people talk about, oh, we need these pills to deal with miscarriage care, the second pill is in use and available. It's the first pill that's a killer, and it's the 2 of them together that are a destroyer. Yeah, this is kind of funny. Number 1, how many chemical abortions are there in the country? Don't pardon my French, who the hell knows? We do not have a national abortion reporting law. We have one that's been introduced by Senator Joni Ernst, but that is a work in progress, unlikely. The CDC and the Guttmacher Institute, the big abortion lobby group, their think tank, they count the abortions based on voluntary information. It's like asking a bank to do its own audit. It's like trusting the Tobacco Institute when they tell you that cigarettes are safe. These people who make money from abortion decide what they're going to tell you about abortion. California, Maryland, New York often don't report at all. California, the sanctuary state, no data whatsoever. If you go to Europe, in Finland, where they do report, 99% of abortions are chemical abortions. But throughout Europe, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, more than 9 in 10 abortions are done with pills. What about in the US? Who can say? Yeah, this is a favorite fact of mine. For years, I've been mocked when I talked about the birth of the chemical abortion pill. And I got to give you a little bit of background about myself. I came to Washington, D.C. as a reporter. And eventually I worked for Focus on the Family and Family Research Council, and we partnered with the National Right to Life to try to keep chemical abortion pills out of the U.S. The company in France that helped with the seed money and the development of the abortion pill, these are actually the people who were a subsidiary of the company that gave Auschwitz to the Nazis, that made the drugs that kills the Jews. I do find it highly amusing that the French scientist who made this pill is offended by the association with Nazis, and I'm like, so it's not the death that bothers him, it's the Nazis. This gentleman was recently profiled in the New York Times. Feel free to fact check me on any of this information. Moving ahead. I want to make this very, very clear. Again, these pills do not necessarily kill the child. We have a lot of people talking to us about the baby being born, about the baby being born into their hands, too young to survive with a heartbeat and a fully formed body. This is psychological warfare on the women who have these abortions. We're often told that people will have 1 abortion with chemical abortion pills, but not 2. There was a big story written in the New Yorker by a woman talking about my favorite abortion. She was radically pro-abortion. What she said was her first abortion was surgical, and she, felt like it was what she needed to do. Her second one was with the pills. It was so horrific that her third abortion was her favorite because she went back to surgery, and it was just such a better experience for the person that wants to end the child's life. But most women tell us they don't want that. Think about the fact that you are outsourcing to your homes, to your dorms, to your apartment buildings, the death of your child. And in fact, what you're doing is triggering labor. Now, I've had 4 children, and I am telling you, that's a thing not to be lightly triggered. And if you were in a miscarriage situation, and you were in a hospital, and you were starting to lose your child, they would give you pain medication. Instead, they send you these drugs and wish you luck. And recently, over Christmas, because always they dump the best data over the holidays or in a data dump, over Christmas a giant study came out by the whole abortion framework of so-called science saying, you know, we really should be more honest with people that it's painful. And I'm like, right, it's painful in the sense that in a baby, you're gonna feel some pressure. I don't know who makes these terms, but I'm telling you, it's a horrific experience. Moving ahead, there are so many health and safety risks to this: infertility, death, exposure to abusers, 4 times the rate of complications, 10 times the death rate. This is a pill that kills not only the child, but the woman. And it can kill your fertility. I'll use myself as an example. When they came out with these pills, there were health and safety standards to protect the woman who took them. For example, about 2% of pregnancies will take place in your fallopian tube or outside of the uterus. That'll kill you. That's a life-threatening condition. You do not alleviate that with an abortion. You have to do with that separately. Planned Parenthood itself used to say on the website that an ectopic pregnancy does not trigger an abortion. They changed that after the Dobbs decision because lying is their favorite thing. But let me put it in a perspective for you. About 2% of the population has a peanut allergy. Does anybody in this room have a peanut allergy? Does anybody in this room know a person with a peanut allergy? Yeah. Has anybody in this room ever been to school and we had the peanut-free table? And you can't get peanuts on an airplane? Have you ever seen peanuts labeled on the label of any food that you buy? Right? Our entire culture has pivoted to protect people who are at risk of death because of a peanut allergy, which is about 2% of the population. Guess what percent of the population might have an ectopic pregnancy? 2%, the exact same. And what do we do about that? Because if you were going to sell these pills to women, they won't end they won't end the pregnancy because it's not in the womb. Yes, you'll trigger bleeding because that's what the pills will do, but that won't end the pregnancy. Women have died when ectopic pregnancies have continued because they thought, oh, I bled, my pregnancy's over, but it wasn't. Then this erupts, then you're dying from internal bleeding. So why doesn't the abortion industry do an ultrasound before a chemical abortion? Well, it's inconvenient. They say that it's like it impedes access. But we don't worry about impeding access to peanuts, but we worry about impeding access to a drug that can kill women in the same percentages. That's what chemical abortion has become in this era. Then there's Rh negative, for example. 15% of the population is Rh negative. That includes myself. When a woman who is Rh negative gets pregnant and there's an exchange of blood with her and the baby, and believe me, there's an exchange of blood between you and the baby. Whether it is by birth, by miscarriage, or by abortion, when there's an exchange of blood, they give you a shot called Rogam to protect your fertility. You have about 24 hours to get this shot. If you don't get it, you will form antibodies that will attack future babies. I had this shot multiple times in 4 pregnancies, including when I was in a fender bender, when I was 7 months pregnant, in case my placenta had torn, because the doctors who were treating me cared about whether or not I ever had another child. We don't do that anymore with chemical abortion pills. The journal Contraception came out and said that they were stopping giving Rogam shots because, number one, the law didn't require it. Oh, okay, so you're not doctors anymore. Number two, there's no proof that we 100% know that if you bleed early, you might also become infertile. What are you talking about? This is a risk, a known risk. Go to WebMD, go to what to expect when you're expecting. It's not like it's hidden knowledge. But number 3, they said maybe women wanted to become sterile. But wouldn't you have to know you were sterilizing yourself to choose sterility? You know, that's not informed consent. This is the chaos that we see in chemical abortion pills. If you go to This is Chemical Abortion, you can read more risks that keep me up at night. Moving ahead, how much blood is too much blood? One of the problems with these pills is you take them, you're bleeding. When is it too much? Unfortunately, again, using myself as an example, I have bled in 3 of 4 pregnancies. You're at home and you're bleeding. You don't know. I'm not a doctor. I'm a journalism major. I took some law classes. I am not a doctor. How much blood is too much blood? Women have died bleeding out because they don't know. Moving ahead, now we're going to get to some of the other risks. I'm going to skip ahead because really I'm not really that big into slides. What I'm really big into are the words themselves. Let's get to this slide. My friends, I have been working against these pills for decades of my life. And like I said, I was at Family Research Council when Bill Clinton tried to bring these pills onto the market. I have a picture of myself and my husband when we got married throwing Clinton Gore signs into the Potomac. I'm pretty sure that the statute of limitations is gone on vandalism at this point. But we were talking at that point about blocking chemical abortion pills. In 2000, we failed. Well, I wouldn't say we failed, but we were overcome by an adversary. And in 2006, there were congressional hearings, and there were requests for evaluation, and Eric's group, ADF, worked with doctors who were filing citizens' petitions. All this activity was going on because, number one, these pills killed babies, and we kept them out for years, and then we couldn't. Then number two, they killed women. How about that? We tried to keep them out for that, but then we couldn't. So it got me thinking, and I'm a bit of a movie buff, and I was watching, these 2 movies actually sparked an idea. Poor Zach has heard me say this 4.5 billion times. So if you want a good idea on how to fight abortion, I think you naturally turn to Hollywood. And I saw the movie Envy with Jack Black and Ben Stiller, if you've never seen it. And in it, these are 2 guys in a factory, and Jack Black's an unmotivated factory worker kind of guy, and he comes up with an idea for this product called Vaporize. And if you spray dog poop, it disappears, so you don't have to touch it and pick it up. I have a dog. I would have purchased it. It turns out, though, that there's an environmental harm to this. And Amy Poehler is Jack Black's wife, and so she's going to run for office, and environmentalists get pissed at her. And they go around to all her campaign stops to ask about Vaporize and about the poop. Where does it go? Where does it go? And I'm sitting there with my husband, and I'm like, what happens to all the stuff that they flush from abortion? Where does it go? Right now, if you're in a hospital or in a brick-and-mortar facility, it's handled, according to the EPA, as pathological medical waste. It goes to an incinerator. It could be buried as humanely. If you got your leg amputated, they don't hand it to you in a sack on the way out the door and tell you to bury it in the backyard, and best of luck. There's a person called the generator of medical waste, the person who started the professional chain of events that led to the logical conclusion of medical waste. So it's not you, the patient, it's the doctor who cut off the leg is responsible for the waste. It's the person who sells the chemical abortion pills, who knows there's going to be medical waste. They are the generator of medical waste, and what are they going to do about it? And that brings me to Erin Brockovich, because she did something about it. And as Students for Life of America, we sort of see ourselves as, Kristen and I, as Erin Brockovich 2.0. Because let me tell you right now, I believe that more than 8 in 10 abortions are going into the water. Places like California, Fairfax County, cities all over the country are recycling toilet water. You are drinking other people's abortions. Zach, our attorney, is going to talk next. We have filed a series of citizens petitions, precursors to legal suit, because the law is my hobby. But these are precursors to holding the FDA, the EPA, et cetera, accountable. There's a lot that we have done. I could talk more about it. But I think these are 2 brilliant men. They have been leading this legal strategy. I've been writing a lot of the media reports, but like I said, I've been involved a little bit. Y'all, you're drinking other people's abortions, and we can prove it. And Zach can tell you more about it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We are going to talk about the poop cycle, the water cycle. This is going to be very boring for about 5 minutes, but you need to have this base of knowledge to understand what's happening. So basically, if you follow the purple lines and dots, we trace water through the earth, right? It's picked up in evaporation and transpiration into the clouds. It rains, hits the ground, comes down into the lakes and streams. That water, as well as aquifers, that water is picked up and usually cleaned to some degree, and then we use it as drinking water and bathing water, right? It's called potable water. That's the term we use, potable water. You may have seen that at like campgrounds, non-potable water and potable water, right? The difference between the two, treated and non-treated. So we then use this potable water. We flush our toilets and take showers, and it goes down the drain. Unless we have a septic system at home, which is a little different, it then goes via pipes to the wastewater treatment plant. The wastewater treatment plant then treats the water, and depending on where you're at, what municipality, usually they're municipal or quasi-municipal water treatment plants. Depending on where you're at, it either gets put back out into the environment as what's called effluent. The outflow from the wastewater treatment plant is effluent. It's commonly done just as a pipe into the river or stream. Otherwise, it's put into the groundwater directly to an aquifer. That's effluent. Or usually west of the Mississippi where it's more arid, the water is then fully recycled and it comes back to our houses in our taps. So then we drink the water that we use the restroom of. But let's go back to the effluent piece. If I'm upstream, literally upstream from one town, then my poo and pee is treated and put back into the river. Then the water is picked up from the river by a different municipal downstream, and that is then goes through the same process. It's treated, and then someone drinks my poop and pee downstream. I drink it if I'm west of the Mississippi. You drink it if you're downstream from me, east of the Mississippi. It's not entirely, I'm overgeneralizing clearly, right? I'm trying to get a point home. We could have an entire 2 or 3 credit environmental studies or water studies class just on this slide. Okay, I'm trying to condense it into 12 minutes. You're going to have to go with me, okay? All right, so we've talked a little bit about the poop cycle, but think about where that water goes. So this water, if a woman has a chemical abortion, it is metabolized. The active metabolites, there are 3 of them. I'll explain what that means in a second, but the drug is still active when it leaves the body. It leaves the body 3 ways, poop and pee, but also placental contents. What's in the placenta? Blood, tissue, right? Umbilicus, amniotic sac, amniotic fluid, okay? These are contaminated with the progesterone inhibiting drug called mifepristone. The body metabolizes it. It is 3 active metabolites. The difference between them is kind of academic, but the reality is, what is an active metabolite? An active metabolite is when the product that leaves the body still performs the function that it was intended to perform when you ingested it to begin with. So if you take the mifepristone tablet, it functions. When your body digests it, it excretes it, and it still functions. It still does the thing that it was designed to do to begin with. As compared to an inert or inactive metabolite, if I take a Tums because I have some heartburn, my body breaks it down, turns it into calcium for my bones and whatever else. My body excretes that. It is no longer active. It no longer performs that function if someone was to ingest, basically the water or that. There's the difference between active and inactive. This is active. This is a synthetic hormone. It's synthetic, it's man-made. It doesn't exist anywhere on Earth except in these pills. It literally doesn't exist in the natural world. It is synthetic. So what that then means is it's also very potent. It's very potent. It's very strong, right? How it works is with a fairly high dose over a short period of time, a couple of days. And that's kind of how it works. And the woman's body is intended to excrete that. Okay. Then this drug, you also need to know, is what's called fat soluble. Usually vitamins, minerals, drugs are either water soluble or fat soluble. There are other things as well, but again, we got 7 minutes and 9 seconds. Okay, I gotta cover it quick. So it's fat soluble, which then means it takes a little bit longer for your body to process. It's your fat cells that are doing the work here. And if you were to ingest this over a longer period of time, it would accumulate in your body, right? It's called bioaccumulate. It would stay in your body for an extended period if you ingested it over and over. But over time, because of the half-life and how your body processes it, it does clear it out. unless what you're doing is drinking it all the time. Huh. Okay. This, again, we could spend a whole semester on. It's basically a quick overview. The liquid is along the right column, along the top row, rather. Then we scrape the solids out. Then those solids are handled a couple different ways, right? It becomes ultimately water, as we've discussed, the solids that we put on our fields as fertilizer, and then also our compost, which is, again, a type of fertilizer. So our fruits and vegetables are treated with the stuff from our wastewater treatment plants as fertilizer, nitrogen, okay? So the metabolites from mifepristone are in the water, and they're in the fertilizer and the compost. It's in all three, which then means it's picked back up in our food, potentially, okay? So just know this is some of the stuff we're looking at and researching. We just finished a research study. It's coming out next quarter, being published in the academic journal next quarter. What we found is that, there's one more thing, and Christy mentioned this. Medical waste is handled one of two ways. Basically, it's autoclaved, which is high pressure and heat. It's incinerated, then moved to a landfill, or a different type of treatment incineration, right? So we the amputated leg example, that amputated leg is done this way, put in a special landfill or incinerated, so that it doesn't bleed into the water table. Okay, so that's how medical waste is treated. But for chemical abortions, they said on the Planned Parenthood website, which they've taken down since we've drawn attention to it, of course, right? Is don't look, just flush. That's what they say. Don't look at that placental sac with the heart beating baby, just flush it. Okay, that's what they say or have said. All right. So, before I tell you about the findings of the study, let's talk about what progesterone actually does. What progesterone does, and then what anti-progesterone does. So, progesterone inhibiting chemical, which is mifepristone, does the bottom two things. But the first several are what progesterone does. What is progesterone? It's progest. Gest means gestation, pregnancy. Pro is in favor of. That hormone naturally does a bunch of things. It supports placental attachment in pregnancy. That's the most common thing. It also does a bunch of things. Analgesic effect, so pain-reducing effect. Decrease in pain, increase in opioid receptors does that. It helps with mood and serotonin, which is depression and related topics are covered there. It influences the fluid balance of the body through kidneys and hypothalamus. I don't even know exactly what hypothalamus is. I'm an attorney, not a scientist. Did I mention that? It also affects the immune system, creation and modification of T cells. Progesterone does all of these things. So if you live in a constant state of reduced progesterone, you'll probably start to see effects on your body's systems, because your body, man and woman, your body needs some amount of progesterone. Regardless of whether you want to be pregnant or trying to get pregnant, that's a whole separate issue, right? Infertility. It's related chemically and hormonally, but progesterone has a bunch of effects. So if we then are constantly messing with or blocking progesterone, anti-progesterone, it does the inverse of a lot of those things. It starts to mess with our fluid system, it starts to mess with our T cell creation, it starts to mess with our fertility, starts to reduce sperm count and testosterone in men, various other things like that. Okay, so that's what progesterone does. If we start to mess with it, it does bad things. So here's the research that we recently finished. It'll be published next quarter. We took a bunch of samples. When I say we, this was an independent study, water scientists with 3+ decades of experience, it's scientific, all the things, okay? She took water samples. She actually designed the study and had 2 different labs do it. There's a sampling body, and then there's the lab that did the testing. Anyway, so it's all scientific proper, okay? But I'm going to use colloquial language now. Water samples were taken upstream at the tap, just a standard tap like at a municipal building, okay? And then downstream, post the effluent, in several metro areas throughout the country. There were replicate, that's a technical term, it's basically repeat samples, similar areas in different times, right? You have to allow the passage of time. One sample doesn't tell the whole story, so, scientific validity and all the rest. We tested for the active metabolites of mifepristone. I could sit here and geek out on how they do this test. My mind was blown on how the test itself works. It's really cool, but we don't have time for that. But we were able to definitively test for these metabolites. Remember, this is a synthetic anti-progesterone. It is distinct from all the other types of hormones that are also in the water from things like birth control. Okay? It is separate and distinct. The only place it's used is this drug, mifepristone, and it is intended to end pregnancy. We found the samples and the replicates found between 4 and 12 times the amount that's needed for a quote-unquote positive test result. So we're starting to talk orders of magnitude higher than merely a positive test result. You need X amount for a positive test. We're talking 12 times that amount in some of the metro areas. So what are the findings then? The findings are that the mifepristone metabolites were found in the water in significant and very significant levels. Those are scientific terms. I don't even exactly know what they mean, but it's a meaningful term. It's there. It's really there. It's really there to a high degree, okay? Significant and very significant levels. If a 154-pound woman drinks the water, the tap water in these areas, then it bioaccumulates in her body to a clinical dose inside of 9 months. Okay, so we're kind of talking about microdosing. It's not technically micro because it's not a small enough dose to be a microdose. So you just drink water. I've got my water bottle sitting there. It is full of tap water. I have taken a drink out of it. You're just drinking your water. We all drink water. Some of us just drink coffee all the time or whatever, but generally speaking, we all drink water. And we know that we can't survive very long, more than about 3 days without drinking water. So we just drink water. When we drink water, if we're 150, I'm going to run long, sorry. I don't know how to end that. Okay, there we go. If we're just drinking around 8 cups of water a day, and we're a 154-pound woman, if we're less than that, it'll accumulate faster. If we're more than that, it'll accumulate more slowly, because remember, it's fat soluble. But eventually, around 9 months, you will drink enough where a clinical amount, a clinical dose, will be in your body and it will stay there. Why does it stay there? Because you're constantly putting more in. Yes, your body is metabolizing it, but the half-life is kind of long and it takes a little while to get it out of your body. So if you're constantly drinking the water, then you're constantly putting the drug into your system, and inside around 9 months, it's in your body. How many of you know a woman or women who have had trouble getting pregnant or staying pregnant because of progesterone, low progesterone? Right. 80% or something of the room raised their hands. This is an increasingly common effect. There's a lot of infertility going around. It may be, right, this study doesn't prove the causal connection. This study just proves it's in the water. But it may be that because we're all drinking mifepristone constantly, and we have clinical doses of mifepristone in our bodies all the time, that might be why we have low progesterone. Interesting. We haven't proved the causal connection, but what we have proved is it's in the water, and we're drinking it all the time. And what does that then mean, right? So on the prior slide, we talked about anti-progesterones and what it means to have low progesterone and the harms, right? Well, if you're always taking a drug that messes with your body's ability to use and produce progesterone, then you're going to start probably seeing all these negative effects. Again, no causal connection has been established because there's no studies on the long-term use of the synthetic anti-progesterone, because it's only supposed to be used in a one-off setting. So what happens when you have a bunch of recurring abortions with this drug? You take these really high doses, and you do it several times over the course of several years. We don't know. We don't know what the long-term effects are. What's the long-term effects of you taking a little dose every single day for your whole life? We have no idea. It's never been studied because the amount of this in the water has skyrocketed over the last 25 years. This was only approved 25 years ago, 2000. And the number of abortions that are caused by this is now between 600 and 800,000 approximately per year. So that much gets flushed into the water system, and it's now in these very high levels. So the bottom line, as with any good academic study, we end with, well, we need more research because we got to keep funding the careers of these researchers, of course. But the reality is we do. we need a bunch more research. I've already said some examples of things, right? Like, what does it mean to have this long-term effect? Then we have to start talking about animals. There's a whole nother conversation to have about the aquatic life that this is affecting, the reproduction it's potentially affecting, whether it's affecting husbandry. Frankly, we even had a agricultural scientist talking about how the cell reproduction of crops might be being interfered with by the presence of this progesterone inhibitor in our food supply. There's all kinds of downstream research that needs to be done, but we can definitively say that in the United States, at least in the metro areas that we studied, it is in the water, in every single metro area, every single one that we studied, it's in the water at significant levels to the point where you have a clinical dose in your body, on average, about every 9 months, and it stays there. That's shocking.
Every time I hear Zach and Christy talk, I get disgusted, actually. And I live in Fairfax County, and literally after the last talk I attended with you in October, my family and I invested in like a powered water filter. We are not touching Fairfax County drinking water ever again because it is terrible, it's disgusting. We've tested it for other pollutants too, and it's pretty high. It's known nationally to be some of the worst in the country. So,
I disgust people all the time.
We are very gross.
yeah, but it is a legitimate concern, and as someone who's I have 4 young children at home and a pregnant wife at home too. But I note that just progesterone is an important thing in our pregnancies and fertility. So I really appreciate what you all are doing. And given that fact, why are you here on a Saturday? Well, let me tell you, because I think this talk, I would say we should be in the big room, and this is one of the most important talks you can hear all day. Because I think chemical abortion is the #1 priority and issue of our time for the life movement. And you've heard this before, just from Christy, just why is this important? If you believe the abortion industry, 2/3 of all abortions are committed by chemical means. And that's likely through the mail, through the post office. Someone's getting in the mailbox with no medical oversight, intervention, care by a physician at all in this process. And a woman's left alone to have her own abortion in her bathroom, in the basement, in her dorm room, by herself, not knowing what is going on, what is a complication, what is a normal expectation. And I work for Alliance Defending Freedom, and we have represented women in this context who have been harmed by chemical abortion. So it's personal, it hurts women, and it's dangerous because if 2/3 of all abortions are committed by chemical means, again, if you believe the industry, it's about 650,000 women a year take chemical abortion drugs. Why is that important? Because FDA's own label for this drug warns women that roughly 1 in 25 women will end up in the emergency room after taking this drug. So again, I'm a lawyer, but I can do some simple math. If you take 150,000 women and you do 1 in 25, that's about 4%, that's about 25,000 women a year end up in the emergency room after taking these drugs, according to the FDA's own label and the abortion industry's own data. Now, I question the data, and I always question FDA, so I think the numbers are probably worse, but we don't know because we just don't have that data before us. So that's why it's important. Well, again, I work for ADF. I'm senior counsel and director of ADF Center for Life. So I help work on our lawsuit. You may have heard about it, maybe not, but it's called Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine versus the FDA. And that went all the way to the Supreme Court last year. We didn't win, at least on the merits, but we lost on some procedural grounds. I'll talk about that later. But some people ask, why did you bring that case? It was just a policy disagreement. That's best, adjudicated in the political branches of government, whether Congress or the president or just within the agency itself. Well, no, because every federal agency had delegated authority by Congress. Here, the FDA has been given this authority to be the nation's drug gatekeeper, determine what drugs can get on the market and should stay on the market and how they can remain on the market. So it's FDA's obligation to do that, but when Congress delegates that authority, it actually gives them instructions of how to approve a drug or change and modify a drug. So let me tell you the key language here about what the FDA is supposed to do. It is supposed to reject a new drug application, what we call a supplemental new drug application if you're trying to modify your drug, if the application or applications do not include adequate tests or studies to show whether the drug is safe. Okay, if you don't have adequate tests, you must be rejected. All right, so what did the FDA say in 2021 when it authorized mail-order chemical abortion? When it said you no longer have to see a doctor at all in the process. Because if I go back in time, in 2000, when they approved this drug, even FDA under the Clinton administration realized it was a dangerous drug. They put on 3 doctor's visits, day 1, day 3, day 14, because they knew this was high risk and women needed to be closely monitored, especially screened before for contraindications, which is an ectopic pregnancy. You shouldn't take mifepristone if you have an ectopic pregnancy. You don't have that if you have it by mail order abortion. So what did FDA say when they received the application and reviewed the studies? They said, the studies that it reviewed are not adequate on their own to establish the safety of the model of dispensing mifepristone by mail. So as a lawyer, I looked at them like, okay, here's what the statute says. You have to have adequate tests. FDA is almost like being held hostage by the Biden administration, blinking their eyes, saying the studies we have are not adequate on their own to establish safety. That is screaming sue me. So that's exactly what we did. And that was one source of the data. The other source is like, oh, well, we have this other source. It's called it's the FDA's Adverse Event Reporting System, or FAERS, their FAERS database. We get reports of adverse events of all sorts of drugs, including mifepristone. So we have not seen many indications of women dying or anything like that because someone would have reported it to us. The only people obligated to report to FDA about mifepristone complications, nobody actually, not anymore. Back in the day, they required the prescriber to do it. Now, nobody has to do it. But in theory, back in the day when Danco Laboratories and GenBioPro were required to provide this information, they had a private FDA, but they're the manufacturer. So not the prescriber, not the person in the emergency room reporting it. So that was always a very dangerous way to rely on data. And frankly, FDA amended that. On their FAQs, on their website, they say, our database, the number of suspected reactions in the FAERS should not be used to determine the likelihood of a side effect occurring. So FDA said, well, we haven't seen many adverse reactions in our FAERS database. But I'm like, using your own words, you said that's not a reliable source. So on your face, you've said you don't have adequate information or studies to show safety, and you relied on unreliable information to do it. That is why we sued. We went up to the Supreme Court. We had won at the district court. We won twice at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And we ended up losing at the Supreme Court on a procedural ground called standing. They said our doctors, we represented medical professionals, both medical associations and individual doctors. And they claimed multiple sorts of harms. But ultimately, the Supreme Court said, your doctors cannot sue over it, or the medical associations cannot sue over FDA's actions. They just don't have the right to sue because they're not really injured. We disagree, but we'll respect the decision of the Supreme Court. But in the interim, during our case, 3 states intervened. Missouri, Kansas, and Idaho. They enjoined our lawsuit. And just last week, the court let them amend their complaint, kind of bring this new lawsuit, carry on our lawsuit. And that's important because what has happened through mail-order abortion, it was intended by the Biden administration. They saw the Dobbs decision coming, and they decided to throw this mail-order abortion scheme out there because they knew it would undermine the promise of Dobbs. What was the promise of the Dobbs decision? Return the issue of abortion back to the people and their elected representatives, whether at the state level or elsewhere. And so what can states do now? They can enact pro-life laws. So if Mississippi and Texas and other states want to have pro-life laws, or Louisiana, that protect women against the dangers of chemical abortion drugs, they should be allowed to do it now under Dobbs. They do. They have these laws on the books. But what are states like California, New York, and other places doing? They're allowing their mifepristone providers to mail in drugs to these states. So now, and they're openly doing it. They're like, yeah, we're allowing them to mail in, and what are you going to do about it? Sue us. So that's what we think is, and talk about the future of chemical abortion litigation. There are 2 fronts. One, this state litigation against the FDA will continue, and I think states have a very clear sovereign right and injury here because of what the Biden administration knew they were doing by authorizing this. And I frankly think the Supreme Court would be annoyed with those blue states, such as California and New York, trying to undermine the promise of Dobbs. So they have the injury. And once they have that injury, we already won on the law. No one's ever questioned the legal arguments that ADF raised. So I think it's another win for the states. And I'm looking forward to the future of that litigation in the coming months and years, actually. So look forward to that case. But also, what are those sanctuary states doing, or shield law states is what we call them? They need to be taken down too, whether through litigation. The state of Texas recently filed a lawsuit challenging a New York provider. And that's something that's just happening. We'll see how that plays out, but that's going to probably, again, create a constitutional crisis. And again, I think the Supreme Court's not going to be happy. So those are 2 areas of the law on the proactive litigation against what FDA is doing and against mail-order abortion. But the last part of my talk, and I didn't set my timer, so I don't know how much time I have, but I want to focus on this, because this is the good news story. Before the environmental stuff, oh my gosh, don't ever drink tap water again. And then also just like, wow, what are we going to do? We're going to defeat FDA, that's great. But there's a positive thing. Even if we can't win in the courts on this issue, if you've heard about abortion pill reversal, this is important because, as Zach and Christy talked about, it's a 2-drug regimen. Abortion drugs are mifepristone and misoprostol. You take on day 1 mifepristone, and around 24 to 48 hours later, you take misoprostol. Before taking misoprostol, the second drug, you can actually reverse the effects of mifepristone because, as Zach pointed out, you have progesterone and anti-progesterone. Mifepristone is against progesterone. So APR, or abortion pill reversal, is just supplemental progesterone. It's to overwhelm the body and the system and overwhelm the mifepristone. So what ADF does is we represent a lot of doctors and providers, and especially pregnancy centers, who provide abortion pill reversal because they are in every state. Pregnancy centers outnumber abortion providers. I don't know if you knew this, or 3 to 1 in the country. That's amazing. That's an awesome stat. But you know what? Some attorneys general across this country in Washington, California, New York, New Jersey, and elsewhere don't like that fact. They actually wrote a letter complaining that we outnumber them 3 to 1 in that category. And they said, we need to do something about it. So what have they done? They've gone after pregnancy centers for doing abortion pill reversal or telling women about the option of abortion pill reversal. That is just evil, because if you really truly believe in choice and giving women options, like if she wants to change her mind within those first 24 hours before taking that second drug, she should absolutely be told about this option that could potentially save her life. Upwards of 60% of women can change that outcome for her baby and save her baby's life. And we have testimony after testimony of women coming to us and saying, look at my baby, she's 1 year old now. And because of this pregnancy center gave me abortion pill reversal. I've been in the room with the doctor getting the emergency notification, like, you need to get this phone call right now because a woman's thinking about it. She needs to get this, the supplemental progesterone right away. And that is what certain states are trying to shut down in relation to what our clients are trying to do. And I just think abortion pill reversal is important. So in the future, what I want to see in terms of APR is an FDA approval of this regimen. I think, the Biden administration, I'm not going to say too much about it, but I think there may have been some roadblocks along the way, and I would like to see the new Trump administration come in and help facilitate this, and maybe they need some studies, but get FDA approval of that, which would help undermine what the states are doing. But we're going to continue to litigate this issue on the state level and ward off that, because I think it's an important fact that people need to know about this really terrible thing about chemical abortion. There is hope. And there is an opportunity to change your mind after that first drug. Because what happens is women take that first drug, they're coerced a lot of times, they're pressured, and immediately upon consumption, they regret their decision. And they Google it. They go, how can I reverse my abortion, chemical abortion? And they see these websites saying, you can, contact us here. And even the state's attorney generals are going after that because they don't want women to find that Google search. And they're saying, what's your algorithm? We want to know. They were asking our clients this. And we were actually taking one case all the way to the Supreme Court because, frankly, it's a First Amendment right and that the government has no business asking. So I'm going to stop there because I want to make sure we have time for questions, and we're almost at noon. But maybe we can go a little over. But thank you very much for your time. I really love that it's a packed room because this is an important issue over time. Thank you.